Tonight's subject is Fire in the Hills. We're very fortunate to have as our speaker Captain George Laing, who is for the last 10 years been perfecting his skills at explaining to us the dangers, some of the ways that we can stay away from the dangers and things that we can do to prevent the dangers of fire coming toward our homes in the hills. The format tonight will be speaking with his PowerPoint. We'll dim the lights a little bit. I'm sure there are going to be questions, and the request has been that if you have questions, please write them down. So I have 3 tablets and I have pens, and so if you have a question at any time tonight, kindly raise your hand and I'll pass you the tablet. You can write it down and then we'll read the questions at the end. One other request is if you have a question specific to your street or your house, something that won't apply to other people, would you kindly hold that for the end and talk to Captain Laing about that specifically so that we don't have other people waiting for the answer on your particular house and not a general question. So thank you very much. This program is sponsored by CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. The training happens twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year in a number of cities, including Walnut Creek. And a number of the questions that we'll have tonight will be sort of oriented toward what community volunteers can do during emergencies. If you have any interest at the end of the evening about learning more about CERT, we have a few brochures here, and we'd be more than happy to make sure that you know about the next CERT training in Walnut Creek. With that, Captain Laing.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Joe, for the invitation. He's been sending me requests and information. He's been asking specific questions and gathering information, specific questions from the community, and I've tried to incorporate that information here. I'd like to thank you all again for coming out. Game 7 of the World Series makes me feel like a big draw here, so I really appreciate you coming out. So we'll start with the presentation now and start referring to the slides. It was interesting that Joe originally titled this Fire in the Hills, and that got me thinking because it's true that hills in our area have been very problematic over time. And the fires that have occurred, especially in certain areas in the East Bay Hills, have been among the most devastating in the nation's history. And we're a very short distance away from those locations. Everybody here remembers the fire on Mount Diablo last year, and that mountain has burned in the past. And there's several differences, and we'll touch on the reasons why fires are different in those 2 locations. And we'll talk about, when it comes to people and property, where people are building homes now is more problematic, but there is a solution. So I hope to provide you information that will help those who are interested in CERT understand what professional, organized emergency service responders do, what they train, how they're equipped, what their approaches are, and how they address larger campaign scale fires, and where community organization can really help out. I see several people here in the room. I see Carl from the Rossmore presentation. Anybody else here see the presentation in Rossmore? Okay, so some of this will be a little bit familiar to you, but this is, this.
Some of us have a little trouble hearing. Could you
Okay.
raise the microphone and speak into it more?
I'll get in there a little bit closer. How's that? Is that better? And you'll see in this presentation there is some more technical detail about how fire moves, how it works, because I think it's important for people who are interested in this issue to really understand the basic elements of the physics of fire so that you understand what the strategy involves. So get right into it. Thanks to Joe and the Community Emergency Response Team, and to the City of Walnut Creek and the library for hosting us here today. Everybody see the screen all right? Maybe we drop it down. I think we're going to start cutting off some of the bottom of these slides. It's only up because I was hitting my head on it before. Keep going down. There you go. That's good. Okay. Now, if you can't hear me, please let me know. Try not to. Okay, so to start, we'll address a fire that occurred 23 years ago, almost to the week that was in Oakland. Anybody here during that fire? A lot of people. So the area here is familiar to you. What you see is an image that's a false color infrared that shows all the houses, the structural footprints that were involved or lost. And you can see toward the top of the picture that's oriented to the north. The tunnel comes out of the hill, and you can see, anybody? I don't have a laser pointer, but if you can see, you'll see a better picture of it, and it's difficult to detect, but kind of at the top third of the image, there's a deep cleft, and that deep cleft is oriented to the northeast, and that's a very important element of the fire history in that part of Oakland. And we'll touch on that more. But the basics of the fire started on a Saturday, and it was attacked by Regional Parks and Oakland Fire. They thought they had it out. The dawn of the next day, Sunday, winds picked up, the relative humidities dropped, and the air temperature picked up. And in that part of Oakland, and in the East Bay Hills in general, winds and relative humidity based on elevation change the dynamics when the winds come out of the north or the east. So the fire that they thought was out rekindled, and one ember, everybody who was there saw it, including a news crew from Channel 2. They saw it hit a ripe batch of brush, and the fire took off. And it ended up consuming almost 1,600 acres, nearly 3,800 structures and apartments, killed 25 people, and cost nearly $1.5 billion. It was the first major destructive fire that the United States had experienced that was caused by a vegetation fire. There have been many since. Southern California experienced the sieges in 2003 and 2007. There was the lightning complex in Northern California in 2008, and we've had subsequent years of extreme fire behavior and fire loss in the state of California. The East Bay Hills are no stranger to this problem. But it's not a new problem. 1991 wasn't the first. In fact, going back to the 1900s, these same Diablo wind conditions, also known as Fane winds, have contributed to 10 other significant fires with costs that aren't adjusted but accumulated to an additional $500 million. And they burned throughout the same area. You can see, and it's too bad that's a washed out picture. If you're interested, you can go to the East Bay Regional Parks website and look at that. The picture on the left shows the area of the 91 fire along with the other fires that have occurred in that area. In some cases, the same home has been rebuilt in the same location repeatedly following fires. And yesterday, I was part of a group speaking at a state level about how insurance protects these properties and why they continue to rebuild in these locations. But that's over $2 billion for fires just in the same area. For those who don't know, the first major fire that destroyed huge parts of the East Bay occurred in Berkeley in 1923. And there was a fire that started up on Inspiration Point, and it burned all the way to what would be the far northwest corner of campus and elsewhere down to MLK, current MLK. Consumed almost 600 buildings. Wood siding and wood shake roofs were known to be a big contributing factor to that fire. But there's a plaque, and there's some interesting information on the Berkeley Historical Site. I found a movie, it's a film, silent film, of a well-dressed couple that were making their meal for the evening on the smoldering remains of their home. That was something else. I had never seen that. Here's kind of what I'm talking about, that area in Oakland. The area on the left is close as I could get it to the picture showing the fire impact in that part of Oakland. The picture on the right is through Google Earth looking west-southwest. So you're above the ridge and you're looking kind of south but more west. And you can see where all the squiggly little lines, those are all going downhill, and the squiggly little lines going to the left, that's that deep cleft I pointed out to you. And that's the area that if you've ever been on Grizzly Peak, you get to a point where you can see over to the left and you can see Mount Diablo, and you can see over to the right and you can see all of the bay. And that's that narrowest part. Well, that's very close to where the fire started. And that area, if you're looking down, kind of branches out. So you can imagine the wind just coming like a freight train, blowing a fire like a torch down into that area where it was focused. So that's, Joe asked to know more about what we've learned from this fire. We've learned a tremendous amount of information. Well, what does that mean here? What does that mean for the hills of Lafayette, the areas around Walnut Creek, about Mount Diablo and Clayton? How about Martinez? So unsurprisingly, these areas have all experienced fire. There's a rich fire history. The whole state of California is a fire-adaptive ecosystem. Large parts of it depend upon fire for regeneration and growth. We move into it, we build houses, we create a problem. It's not the fire ecology that's been going on for millennia here. It's our interests. It's what we're doing in it that create a problem. There were some outbuildings that were destroyed in this fire, and a couple of homes. I took a helicopter tour of it a couple weeks ago, and surprisingly, it is a very large burned area, very complicated to fight a fire in that area. We've had fires, including one that was, I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago, that was a little bit west of Rossmore. And there were 3 homes that were burned up in an occluded part of Walnut Creek that burned up through a minor grass fire because it was on a hill. So this kind of fire, the fire that happened in Oakland, the big national media attention fires, are not where the devastation can occur. Devastation in this area can occur in just about anywhere where the necessary conditions are met. So let's get into that. Everybody hopefully has heard about the fire triangle, and it's actually now evolved to include this third element. It's heat or energy, fuel, and oxygen. And when they get together, they have a sustaining interaction, which is characterized by exothermic reactions releasing heat and light. Everybody knows that's fire. It is a really mysterious physical process. We really don't even know how a match works still. But when it comes to wildland fires, it's more complicated because you need the necessary elements for fire, but then you have the exacerbating or the enhancing effects of the fuel conditions, the topographic conditions, and the weather. So when we're describing these north and east winds that are blowing very strong, that are very dry, and the air temperature is very hot, that's bad fire weather. That's when you hear these red flag warnings. Sometimes you'll hear a red flag warning early in the year and you'll say, how can that be? Well, there's some cases where the wind is so dangerous and the fuels are just right. And we measure these fuels almost every day to determine what they will do, how they'll perform when they burn. And when that recipe is right and the danger is high, then we ask people to be careful about what they're doing outside and to be ready. And we'll talk more about ready, set, go. But that really changes how some organized fire agencies prepare for the day and how they position their resources. So you'll hear a lot about that today: fuel, weather, and topography. That little squiggly area on the lower right side there, that's representative of burning embers. That's the joker in the deck. Burning embers are created well after the fire front has passed. And material that has been burned continues to burn and produces embers that are carried by the wind. Burning embers produced by the fire front are carried through the air and land in things that burn and propagate the fire well in advance of the fire front. Wildland fire dynamics are very, very complex, and it's difficult to accurately predict what fire will do. But we know enough to help plan for what to do. So you see in the media, 300-foot tall flames just marching through the west, and we're all going to burn up in the fiery inferno. That's really not how it works. These little guys move like snow. They collect like snow. They get into your house through eaves like snow. They can break windows. They can gather on your roof. This is how fires are propagated. This is how major fire events become really problematic. But the basic issue here is any one of those little embers can create a whole series of problems, and a small area of burning grass can get progressively heavier fuels burning until you have fire that is it's almost impossible to directly attack. You can drop tons of retardant from air tankers, you can create fire line with bulldozers, but you're fighting a fire that's very difficult to attack. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. There are some elements that you can see here where fire burning on a hill extends the flame length. So it's more likely to transfer into a canopy of a tree. It's more likely to heat the fuel uphill of it, and fire entrains air because it needs the oxygen to burn, so it's sucking in air from the sides and below, and so fire is pushing itself up a hill, and it's preheating the fuels in front of it. And if you see down here on the right, if that fuel happens to be a home that's poorly situated on top of a hill, that's additional fuel for the fire. And so one of the strategies that we talk about for the long-term fixes to the issues that we face in California are land use planning. Are we going to allow homes to be built at the top of a slope? Are we going to allow homes to be built in box canyons or saddles? These topographic features which naturally enhance fire behavior, extreme fire behavior. But there are ways to protect against it. We'll get to that too. Everybody recognize what that is on the right at the top there, right? Believe it or not, I had a really hard time finding a good picture of a eucalyptus forest. Eucalyptus, and we call this a hazardous fuel. It fits the characteristics that we all know. It dries out early. It has a very oily secretion which becomes a volatile compound during fire. And the bark and leaves form lofted embers that can travel for miles. And all the way around, it's bad. It's weak. It has weak limb attachments, so there's a lot of surface fuel. There's a lot of things about eucalyptus that are problematic, which is why we focus on them so much. And they were a key component to the extreme fire behavior during the 91 fire. There was a period of drought about 1988, 1989. And the drought then was followed by a freeze, which caused damage to the trees, and they dropped a lot of limbs and material. And so there were calculations following the fire that there were, in some cases, more than 100 tons of surface fuel in these areas where the fire was burning through the eucalyptus forest. And this follows a history going back to the early part of the 1900s, where some very entrepreneurial individuals wanted to create a forest of eucalyptus as lumber product without really understanding that it was a poor lumber material. But they planted plantations upon plantations. They took out the redwoods and they replaced it with eucalyptus. And there are several parts of the East Bay Hills that are still very densely planted with overgrown eucalyptus. But the problem you see there is on the lower left. It doesn't matter if it's eucalyptus or not. It could be juniper, it could be chamise, it could be coyote brush, it could be grass, it could be regular oats, it could be pine trees. Even at this time of year, it can be native species. Everything is already so dry. It's already so dry at the end of a couple of years of drought. So what we talk about is preventing fires from transitioning to the crowns of continuous canopy coverage. Fortunately, in this part of California, and in most of California, we have what they call an oak grass woodland fuel type, which means that you have largely fire adaptive oak trees and largely native grasses. And that's why it's a fire adaptive ecology. You have a low intensity surface fire that burns through the weeds. The trees resist, and in fact, it creates shade and habitat for other species by burning off the lower dead limbs. And so you have basically an annual or periodic cleaning of the lower surface fuels. And that's what's supposed to happen in old growth forests too. The redwood trees, big at the base, heavy dense trees, resist fire and ignition, and fire moves through and burns the surface materials, the duff, and that provides nutrients for the soil. This is a studied phenomenon. What changes is where you have exotic invasive species, Scotch broom, French broom, even some native species that get overgrown. In California, we have a chaparral issue. We have a problem with intense fire behavior coming from dry brush. So the brush fire and grass fire, we in the fire service use the term vegetation fire ubiquitously without respect to fuel type. But we'll talk more later about how we characterize fire and fire behavior. This is a picture from the 2003 Southern California fire siege. And you can see here that this is the wind condition, the Foehn wind, and that's F-O-E-H-N. They call them Santa Anas down south, and we call them Diablos up here. They call them Chinooks elsewhere. The phenomenon is the same. It's this time of year. Colder air is pushing down to the central part of the country, and it forces the hot, dry air to the lower areas. And as that hot air is pushed off through the arid areas, it loses its moisture, and then it starts hitting these geographic features, and you start to experience this phenomenon called subduction, which was a key element in the intensity of the fire behavior in the 91 Oakland fire. But the wind, easy enough to say, hot, dry, strong from the north or east. This is from the Jesucita fire in Santa Barbara a couple of years ago, and those fires are characterized by the kind of subduction events that are called sundowner winds. For those who know Santa Barbara, they have the transverse range, which is it's an interesting geographic phenomenon, but that creates those beautiful hills going right down to the water. But you can get those sundowner winds, which are essentially a subduction event, which create these enormous firestorms moving through very densely packed areas. Those fires, every single one of them, I don't know if you've driven through that area, it scares the crap out of me. I mean, those areas are very scary. And you have big houses that are just built right next to each other. So what's the issue? Because we've talked about what makes fire extreme. Well, what about the other side? How do we combat the hazard? How do we address the risk? Well, we need to have a couple things, but the first and foremost is we have to be able to get to the fire. And the sooner we get to a fire, the sooner we start to attack it, the smaller it is, the smaller it stays. The quicker we can get there, the more resources we can apply, the faster it is that the fire will be contained and extinguished. This is essential, basic firefighting practice. It doesn't matter if it's a structure fire, a vehicle accident, whatever emergency we're going to, we need to get there with our stuff as quickly as we can. But you can see that in Oakland and parts of our area, let's make no mistake, and parts of our area that aren't hilly, that there are roads that are very narrow and you can't have two vehicles passing each other, much less a fire apparatus. And you see up there, that's a whole variety of different fire apparatus that would have to get someplace. And you can see these vehicles that were burned during the fire, and they were congesting one another. They were obstructing one another. And I was considering providing video showing people. It's tough to drive on this road here during the holiday seasons. Imagine fire and burning embers filling the air, and you've got your family and you're looking for your dog, and you're scared out of your mind, and you're trying to get out, and then this giant fire truck is right there, and it becomes a really difficult situation. But in the tunnel fire was a critical problem. And I'll be honest and say that problem isn't different up there now. Access is a major problem throughout our jurisdiction. Water supply. I recently did have somebody tell me, well, you don't need water to fight fire. Didn't know what to say. For those who don't know, and this is just very quick, East Bay Mud has a series of pressure zones, and they have water storage tanks at various elevations that supply that elevation. So if you have a tank at this height, then your service area is this elevation, with some exceptions. And that depends, because you have various sizes and ages of pipe, and you'll have constrictions of volume or pressure or both. But the basic principle is you get your water up to the highest part that you can possibly get it to, and then you allow it through what's called head pressure or gravity to get down to the surface area and distribute itself. Part of the problem in the Oakland Hills fire was that the pumps that supplied the tanks got burned up. Some of the pipes failed, but the real issue is all the houses burned up along with their fixtures, spilling water. So it came to a point where there's no water to fight fire. We had a fire in Lafayette a couple years ago in a not too new part. Big house, beautiful house. Fire started in the cellar, wine cellar, beautiful wine cellar. Beautiful wine cellar. And I hope this doesn't come across as poking fun at this house or this neighborhood, or saying that there's a problem for them, because it's a problem for us. That slide I had at the beginning, it's a shared responsibility. It's for all of us. But everybody there was surprised when we hooked up to the hydrant and we tried to pump water out and no water came out of the East Bay Mud hydrant. And we found out later what it was. You have old small pipe, and then somebody's like, hey, let's put a subdivision in over here, and then, oh, we need this bigger pipe. Well, you've got a small pipe that's old feeding a big pipe. Well, you have to spend most of your water supply filling up the bigger pipe, and nothing comes out of it. I mean, maybe your shower and your washing machine will work, but the water you need to fight a fire won't come out. And how do you know that in advance? We didn't know. So, structural density is another question. Part of the original discussion about wildland-urban interface was how do you characterize it? Is it a structural density issue? Can you have an area of residential built neighborhoods surrounded by wildland areas? Can you call the whole thing wildland? Or what about, and this sounds familiar here, what about neighborhoods surrounding big open spaces? Is that an interface? Yes, they both are. What's the problem that we're trying to address? We talked about it. You get the necessary components for combustion met in vegetation. and let's say it's a bad weather day, so it's good for fire. What are you worried about? You're worried about burning up houses. Yes, we don't want to lose a house. What's the problem is one house starts burning and it creates a tremendous, exponentially greater amount of energy. And if it's close to its neighbors, even the radiant energy will ignite the neighbors. And what's that? That is a conflagration. So what are we worried about? We're worried about vegetation fires initiating urban conflagrations. And how do we address that when you have these various types of interface areas? And how do you address it reasonably? Thankfully, some smart people are working on this. But here's what that problem looks like. I'll tell you what I think happened in this picture. The fire started here, and the wind is blowing this way, and the hill goes like that. So now, even just what we've talked about tonight, you can see how that recipe means that house is burning most intensely, the farthest away from this area. But the heat pushes it up. And you have three types of heat. There's convective heat, there's radiant heat, and then there's the heat that just moves all over the... Actually, I'm honestly embarrassed to say I forgot the third type of heat. It'll come to me later, I hope. But you see, what you have here is you have the radiant heat coming off the burning structure. That's just the heat you feel when you're sitting in front of a fireplace. And that's so intense that that top house right there, it's causing it to ignite. But then you have the convective heat. That's the heat that's carried and lofted and transferred through the air. That's what fire looks like in the air. You have that combination of dynamics in this picture. And in Oakland, they calculated that was 13 homes per minute that were igniting. That's supposed to say an ignition rate of 13 homes per minute. So this guy, Rexford Wilson, worked for NFPA, and he said back in 1965, the conflagrations cannot be controlled by massive human effort at the time of the fire. They can be controlled by the proper use of building materials and the provision for exposure protection. That concept of exposure protection is essential in the fire service. It's an essential concept. It's what we do all the time. It's really awesome to see these super cool planes. And I was just at a class last week. It was at an air attack base down in Paso Robles. Talking to all these guys. They're all former military pilots and super cool. What a tremendous asset. Do you know how much that costs? It is unreal how much it costs. And what they're trying to do, it involves a bigger strategy of fire suppression. But you take every fire engine in the state, and you wouldn't have enough of them to cover the Oakland Hills houses that burned. You cover maybe a small fraction of it if you can get them there. We have to be smarter than the fire. And believe it or not, it's a good thing that interface fires are conflagrations, because we are very effective in solving that problem. Anybody here remember the MGM Grand? We learned so much from that fire about internal decorative materials, about protected enclosures, about rated shafts, about occupant notification, about suppression systems, about access for fire equipment, about evacuating occupants, about separating occupancies. Everything that we do today is based on these horrible, atrocious fires. I gave a presentation yesterday about insurance, and in 1765, Benjamin Franklin started the first, I can't remember the name of it now, it was the first home insurance company in the United States. He refused to insure wooden houses. Why? Well, because they burn up. Basic. We have learned a lot, and we'll continue to learn, but there's a plan, so here's the plan. Defensible space. There are brochures up here on the table, and we can talk more about defensible space, but the basic strategy is fairly basic. You reduce the fuel around your home to the point where, especially at the foundation, or especially within 5 feet of your home, you really don't have anything that can burn, because that's how your house will ignite. And we'll talk more about what you do to the structure next, but this is essential. You want to reduce that heat energy around the house so the house won't ignite, but really it's more important for there to be firefighters there defending your house, which is why they call it defensible space. Keep this in mind when we're talking about the hauling chart later. There are new construction requirements for homes that are in fire hazard severity zones that are intended to resist ignition intrusion. And these have been in effect now since 2006 in one form or another, and they're being improved. But the strategy for a single home combines defensible space and ignition-resistant construction. And you can see here that the key components are a roof. Roof is essential. A Class A roof in fire hazard severity zones is your biggest single surface. And if your roof is good, it's properly protected, the eaves are protected, and you don't have a possibility of ember ignition along what they call the roof edge or the drip line, you're probably a third of the way there. Dual pane windows, a good deck, a deck that doesn't have storage underneath it. These are basic things. I mean, the dual pane window should have one pane of tempered glass. Yes, there is an increase in the cost of building your home in this area. But again, we're sharing the responsibility. It's your responsibility because you're interested in living in an area that is prone to extreme fire behavior. It's our responsibility to help you understand what we need from you to do our job. So this is part of the new code requirements that have been developed over the last 7 years to address this issue. But that's just the beginning. The state of California has developed a strategic fire plan. And this is where it gets interesting. Has anybody here heard of the SRA fire prevention fee? I saw one hand. Two. So there are people who've heard of it. What about the STEP program? Okay, so there are some people who've heard of this. Elements of this plan are essential, and they've been developed very rapidly, and they have funding attached. The not uncontroversial SRA fire prevention fee has just started its first round of grants. And they are funding things like expedited environmental compliance review for fuel treatment projects. They're funding fire safe councils. They're promoting a fire-wise education. They're helping to, STEP means severity, treatment, education, planning, and protection. So that's what that means. The severity is they're doing new fire hazard severity zone mapping with state-of-the-art computer modeling that are peer-reviewed. That was an issue when it first came out several years ago. Now they're coming up with an improved mapping plan. They've collected the SRA fire prevention fee, which is applicable only in what's called the state responsibility area. We have state responsibility area in our jurisdiction, but it's complicated because although we provide some services in that area, the true responsibility for the cost of fire suppression lies with the CAL FIRE, with the state of California. So they've hired new inspectors to do defensible space inspections, and they're providing more information to people who live in those areas about what they can do to comply. And we already talked a little about the coordinated land use planning. There are specified experts who will be with CAL FIRE, who will meet with local planning entities when they open up their housing element in the general plan, because that will also cause them to open up their safety element and address the issues about placing or allowing growth in areas that are guaranteed losers as far as fire is concerned. And they will address that so that growth can be planned with an eye towards susceptibility to wildland fire exposure. And of course, the enhanced public education. You may wonder where Contra Costa County Fire fits into that. We work closely with the state. We've worked closely with them on refining these concepts and implementing these concepts and helping to make these concepts well known. We want everybody to understand, because the plan is meaningful and it's effective, and it's not just defensible space. There's a lot that goes into it. So we're going to talk a little now about some of the questions we got, and I hope this will help, because what we're really trying to get to right now is where you who are interested in, who are missing Game 7 of the World Series to listen to me talk, where you fit in, where you can help, what your role would be. So these bullets are just intended to address some of the general questions, not every question, but the general questions I got. We have closed several fire stations. Everybody here aware of that? And we've laid off many people. And, you know, knock on wood, we are turning the corner. Hopefully, we are turning the corner. We've become as lean as we possibly can while still providing a professional, high-quality level of service to our service area and our community. The way that works is we still have our apparatus, our equipment, and our personnel positioned as broadly as we can cover an area responsibly. And we can still cover emergencies in all 304 square miles of our jurisdiction. We can handle multiple major emergencies, but that's probably maybe 2 or 3 at a time, and then everybody's busy. So we have what are called automatic and mutual aid agreements with our neighboring jurisdictions, and they automatically come when we ask, just the same as we automatically go to help them. And if things are improving, hopefully we'll be opening up stations again soon. I know that Station 11 in Clayton is just starting to be opened up again. So for those who are wondering, do you still have fire protection? Yes, you still have fire protection. Do you still have an emergency responder who will come if you have a medical emergency? Yes. And we will be there in a very, very short period of time. Is there water available for firefighting? Yes, there is. The subsequent years of drought have created conditions that are far more difficult for the fuels element of the fuels, weather, and topography equation that we were talking about. Everything is so dry. The fire that occurred in Weed earlier I guess it was last month now, just came up out of nowhere and destroyed the town. Why? Because the timber is bone dry. And without getting too detailed, firefighters refer to fuels not necessarily by their name provided by Linnaeus or even their common names, but by the diameter. So something that's very small like that would be a 1-hour fuel. Something a little bit bigger would be a 10-hour fuel. A little bit bigger, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and so on. Most trees are 10,000-hour fuels. And the hour is how long it takes for the moisture in the tree or branch or brush or grass to evaporate off so that the fuel becomes available to burn. So the drought has been devastating as far as fuel conditions go. I also know that we've had several wells start drying up in parts of our jurisdiction, private wells. And that creates problems for those property owners who depend upon that water supply for use in their homes. the question about water available for firefighting, we still have abundant water for firefighting. In some cases, our firefighting plan calls for drafting water out of the delta. We can draft water out of the bay. It's dangerous and corrosive for the long-term health of the pumps and the engines, but we will get water to fight a fire. And there is water. There's plenty of water from East Bay mud. Many of you have heard that the McCullumee River is for the first time being used by East Bay mud to fill their reservoirs. The sustainability of the long-term water issue is not my purview. I'm not an expert in it, but there is water available to fight fires. There is water in the hydrants, and there's water enough to do our job. What do you do if you see or smell smoke? If you're in a hills area and you see what you think is smoke, or you smell smoke and it seems odd that somebody would be having a fire in their fireplace, or that there might be a barbecue but you can't tell, it seems like an awful lot of smoke, you can call 911. We go out on smoke investigations all the time because you don't know, and we have to go out and we have to check. I mean, it's our job. So if you're worried about something, don't hesitate to call. You can call the non-emergency number if you wish. If you don't want to call 911, you can call the non-emergency number, but you can call and somebody will go out. If you're interested in information about what's happening during a fire, there's a fire that's been reported. The fire district has a team of public information officers, and we work very closely with the media because it's in our interest to get the information out as quickly as possible. We want everybody to know what's happening with the fire, where it's moving, what's happened so far. During the fire that was on Mount Diablo last year, our PIO unit was involved with the CAL FIRE PIO team, and we worked together to provide information to the media, because there's the two-part system. You have to gather the information from the incident, and on these incidents you have a huge base camp, you have very complicated lines of communication, you have multiple divisions working various parts of the fire. All of that is highly coordinated. It's as much a campaign as any military effort would be, and it involves air support. You have fixed wing and rotary aircraft, you have hand crews, you have bulldozers, you've got Type 2 engines, you've got just about everything under the sun, and it's coordinated. It's an intentional process. It's highly trained. Everybody's certified and skilled in what they do, and in order to get the information from the commanders of the incident and present it out, we have to follow the same incident command system organization that they do. So that's what I can tell you. If you wanted to know what's going on with the fire, I think I can confidently tell you that the fire district works with the local media to provide accurate and timely information. What to do if there's a fire in your area? We'll talk more about that, but roadways, almost all public roadways are designed to allow 2 lanes of traffic. And they're designed with an adequate width to allow fire apparatus, even big fire apparatus, and vehicles to go in opposite directions. That is not always the case in smaller residential neighborhoods. So we'll talk more about what to do if there's a fire moving in your area. When should you go? When should you go? When you're ready to go. There was, anybody here remember the devastating fires in 2007 in Australia? They call them Black Saturday. Yeah. Australians for years have prided themselves in their ability to be resilient and to be capable and fight fire. In fact, they call them mop bucket brigades because they're very proud of their ability to stay home and use a wet mop to put out ember ignitions on their structure. And for a time there, before 2007, part of the fire service was considering supporting that, stay and defend. You may have heard that. Well, that went away after Black Saturday. Even in Australia, where people are used to very extreme fire behavior, they have a fire index that goes from 0 to 100 or 105. The day of Black Saturday, the index was well into 120. But it was at 6 and 7 in the morning. And people were asleep. in the worst of the fire weather, and they woke up to the, and that was one of the cases where it was a wall of fire, and it came through and it marched through a town. People who left too late. They were killed in their cars. It was terrible. And so then they started talking about fire shelters and everything. The conversation in this country has changed to ready, set, go. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. Is breathing the smoke in a fire hazardous? Yes. Even the wood smoke from your fireplace has highly carcinogenic compounds. The smoke that comes from burning plastics and other elements of structure fires or vehicle fires is some of the worst stuff known to human beings. It's terrible. I was at a vehicle arson class last week, and just watching this material burn was unreal. But yes, smoke is dangerous. It's not good for you to breathe. If you have a vulnerable respiratory system or you're worried about your breathing and there's a fire in the area, you can stay inside and you can tape the windows and doors, turn off the air conditioning, the same you would do if there was a chemical release or they're revived. You can do your best to spare your lungs, or you can go someplace where they have more processed air. A mall would be a good idea. But yes, the smoke is not good for you to breathe. Firefighters breathe it all the time. So to address a little bit, because there were a lot of questions about what CERT can do, and I show you these pictures because what you see there on the left is the structure gear in a Type 1 engine for structure firefighting. And that includes a breathing apparatus. All of that clothing is thermally protected, it's rugged. The breathing apparatus, flashlight. The first training that firefighters do is they have a blacked out mask, and they're trained to crawl through an entire floor of a house looking for a dummy to pull it out while you're breathing. It sounds kind of easy, but it's not. And what you're doing there is you're addressing a totally different kind of fire dynamic. Fires in enclosures are totally different than fires in open spaces. And they're much more lethal to people, especially if they're sleeping. And that's a lot of what we talked about in the Rossmore presentation. The equipment that you see there on the right is the wildland fire gear. There's no breathing apparatus. It's a looser clothing because you're often working in very hot conditions. It's fire resistive, but remember again the Hollings chart. We'll talk about Dr. Hollings. Where people can stand in relation to wildland fires, if the flame lengths generally exceed more than 8 feet, you can't get anywhere close to it. And you have no business being near it as a human being, no matter what your job is or what you're trying to protect. So I say that because every year we see people like this. I like the guy in is like, he just got home from work and he's like, I'm going up to the roof to really get a good look at this. Because every year these people create medical emergencies that take us away from fighting the fire. And that's assuming we can find your house. So you're getting up on your roof with a hose and you're wearing cut off jeans. Remember this. These people are well protected and trained, and they practice, and they understand the danger signs. The truck on the left, the structure truck, has 500 gallons of water, and it's got a pump that puts out 1,500 gallons per minute. The truck on the right, depending on the model of Type 2, is all-wheel drive, also carries 500 gallons of water, and it can mix it with foam, and the pump goes between 750 and 1,000 GPM. The guy with the reel and the garden hose, or the bandana on his mask, is really putting themselves in jeopardy. And what do you think you're going to do by wetting down the lawn? If we're talking about wind, speed, air temperature, and relative humidity that strips the moisture out of well-maintained landscaping and allows it to burn, what is a garden hose going to do? It's going to do nothing. So, what you see there, the top left is the Halling chart. And what you see down there, I mean, it's kind of complex, and I don't know how it looks there. But what you see in the middle On the lower left corner of that diagram is a person with a shovel. And then you see somebody a little bit further up, and they're kind of running away. And then you see a bulldozer. And then you see what looks like a torching tree, and then you see what's basically continuous canopy fire. This is a planning tool that goes along with a very basic fire computer behavior program that is intended to predict intensity and rate of spread. And if it's in this blue range, then you can stand around and probably be okay. If it's in the green range, you're in the danger zone as a human being. And once it gets into the orangish, yellowish range, you better be in a protected environment, because you could take a hot breath and that would be it for your breathing. Or you could experience direct radiant heat contact. These are the dangers, and this is how managers plan to address fires in wildland areas. The joke is when you get past that area where the rate of spread and the heat per unit in British thermal units per square foot exceeds what would create a continuous canopy fire, they say, here you're hauling tools, here you're hauling equipment, and at the top there you're hauling butt. You are getting out of there. At the right there is the LCES, the Lookouts, Communication, Escape Routes, and Safety Zones. These are the mantras of wildland firefighters. And in some cases, they'll position somebody so that they can look and see where conditions are changing. They'll get weather reports. Maybe you're in an area where you don't have good radio communications. They'll have somebody there who can get the radio communications and convey it to the rest of the team. What you see there on the lower left is the 2014 version of a hauling chart. And this is some of the very, very fancy software that is used by wildland fire managers these days. The color coding corresponds to the hauling chart. And if you divide your fire into divisions, which on a very large fire like this, you'd have several divisions, your planning tool is for a 24-hour period between 10 and 10. And this is how you know how you can allocate your resources. But really, if all hell breaks loose and you're in a bad spot, then down here you have fire shelter deployment. Anybody remember the hot shots in Arizona last year, the Prescott hot shots?
The dead ones.
Fortunately, it's happened infrequently, but it happens. Even grass fire can be lethal. And the reason why I bang this so heavily is that we want people who are interested in helping to help, but we want them to help appropriately. So, we'll get into more of this Ready, Set, Go stuff, but the basic element here is a FEMA preparation plan. And I know that, that many people here are familiar with these elements. But I always ask this question, I mean, if there was an earthquake right now, do you know where everybody is in your family that you care about? And could you get in touch with them? You sure about that? So this is a slide of the western part of our jurisdiction. This is East Richmond Heights. And believe it or not, that fuzzy area at the top there is the entrance to Alvarado Park, and that is a hillside full of eucalyptus, which until very recently had an understory of French broom that was almost 20 feet tall. And I talked to the regional parks fire chief when I started. I was like, have you been to this area? Have you seen this? Because there are all these other areas that they're worried about, really, honestly, and rightfully worried about. Well, he went out there and he hadn't even seen, because what you can't see in this picture, there are probably about 75 houses in that little canyon area there. And they were going through a hazard assessment for all these big hills at the time through a publicly funded measure. And when he saw this, this area, not just through his visual inspection, but through backup computer modeling was determined to be the most hazardous part of their jurisdiction. That includes the area of the tunnel fire that's burned repeatedly. This is our jurisdiction and this is our problem. And our problem includes Lafayette. And this is probably the most hazardous part of our jurisdiction. And the basic thinking here is, if you look, you see that is a classic wildland-urban interface, and you have a rapidly evolving sudden oak death problem, which changes your fire-adaptive native species, and you have probably 3-foot setback of 50s area housing that's all combustible wood. So the potential for a conflagration under a north or east wind condition is very high, and you have a probability of long-range spotting. And if Interstate 80 doesn't act as an effective fuel break, then there will be nothing to stop a fire but the bay. And this is how these catastrophic planning sessions go. They're not always very cheerful, but we need to know what we're looking at. So what's the plan? Ready, set, go. Ready means that you've created defensible space, and here's a little bit more of what that means. And then this is a good example. You've got an area where you're separating the native vegetation from your landscape. Your landscape is planned so that over the life of the landscaping, it's going to be easily maintained, it's going to maintain a spacing, and it's going to retain an aesthetic interest for the people who have planted it. But then you've got a home that complies with all the relevant fire-safe planning tools. So this one house is prepared. What our job is to convince neighborhoods and then areas and then communities to become fire-safe. Because you're not going to protect our urbanized areas from a conflagration with just one house being ready. So we talk about it. You're preparing yourself. You're preparing your home. You're preparing your landscaping. You're making all the best choices you can to protect your interests. But when it comes down to it, you're protecting your life and the life of your family. Life is more important than property. These are basic mission statements. Fire grows and changes unpredictably. Things can change and become dangerous very rapidly. And the products of combustion alone are highly toxic and can kill you. So this is good for those who haven't done it, and this is another thing from the Rossmore presentation that we need everybody to think about. But when I asked you if you knew right now where everybody in your family was, what about in the middle of the night and there's a fire and your house is full of smoke and you're still waking up? Waking up fast, but you're waking up. Everybody needs to know what to do without communicating, and you need to know how to account for everybody. So there's a lot of good information about planning a home escape plan, but this is where it starts. And this is the stuff that you really need to consider. And I know we're talking about wildland fire, but this is an important element of all safety planning. And these things are really important. Make sure that you can get out your secondary path of travel, that there's nothing that's going to obstruct you if it's dark or smoky, that you've got everything you need to get out, and that you've got what you need once you're out, and that everybody you're with knows where to meet up, and that you practice it. Something that we add for CERT communities is you want to consider practicing community evacuations and being aware of your neighbors who might need assistance. Because when we were talking about this at Rossmore, we were talking about, well, do you want to go through an apartment building that's burning and try and get everybody out, make sure everybody's out? That's different than going through your neighborhood and saying, hey, I don't know if you're having a movie marathon in there, but there's a fire coming and we're all going to go, so just checking to see what you're doing. It's not telling people what to do, it's just checking in. But CERT involved individuals are what we like to call a spotlight. You bring a spotlight on these issues to your community and you explain this information, and it's important. The set part is when there's an incident occurring in your area, or there's red flag conditions, or there's something where you want to be prepared. And if there's any final stages you want to take, any final preparations you need to take, that's when you do it. So that's why it's called a family disaster plan. But this would be very familiar to CERT folks. Gas, water shut off, emergency meeting locations, your supply kit, your communication plan, emphasize that, your contact numbers, what's in your car, and having a portable radio or scanner or some form of, bless you, of recharging your phone and whatever else you might need. So when you're ready to go, just go. Now in Australia, they have conditions where in certain areas, if the weather index exceeds a certain value, then people just, hey, we're going to spend the day in town. Hey, we're going to go to the mall. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a big deal. But if you're ready to go and everything about your house is ready, why stick around until the roads are congested? Get out early. Dress appropriately, ensure you have your supply kit, pay attention to the news, and before you go, if you're walking around and there's a fire burning in the area, you want to double check, see if they're, hey, what's going on? Make sure you got fluid. Make sure you're not running after your dog who's chasing a deer somewhere. Don't put yourself in a position where your preparation becomes meaningless. And then you shut all your windows and doors. You can leave on your lights. Turn off the air conditioning. If your car is not backed into the driveway and you feel comfortable getting ready to go, then back it into the driveway. But leave early enough to avoid being caught in fire, smoke, and road congestion. And if you are told to leave, get out. So you have a plan. Stay calm. You're ready. Imagine that. We've talked a lot about a lot of stuff, a lot of scary stuff tonight, but hey, you've got a plan, something happens, and you're ready to go? Well, how relaxing is that? It's probably not going to be 100% relaxing, but you're going to feel a lot better than if you weren't ready. We're pushing this. The Firewise USA is an organizational program for interested communities to gain national recognition for becoming Firewise, for basically implementing the concepts that we've talked about. And this really is an important thing, especially because there may be some insurance rate reductions that go along with it. So if you're in an area that's prone to fire exposure and you're interested in doing what you can to minimize your risk, there are these programs. So if you're interested, let me know. And that's what I have. So thank you for your time.
We have a few questions. Some of these would apply to just about anybody. One would relate to the fire-safe areas. Some folks have received letters from the fire district saying that, among other things, you should clear all space within 10 feet of your house, and I believe that's most of the landscaping. And I know that many people feel that this makes the property look kind of goofy. Are there any ways to be able to do some of that without making it look goofy that you're aware of?
Part of what I've done in the past several years, I've studied this a lot. I've worked with some really smart people from University of California, Berkeley, with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. I've worked with post-baccalaureate fire ecologists and a fire scientist that has just started to work for the Institute for Building Home Safety, which is a insurance company funded research lab. But it's not just one insurance company, it's all of them. And they've all funded this. It's actually really amazing. They study the effects of wind-driven burning embers and wind-driven rain events like hurricane winds. They've created this place in South Carolina, and they can build a full-scale house on a turntable and create hurricane-force winds. I mean, if you're a scientist, this is Christmas every day you go to work. And they've created a series of burning brand ember generating torches that they put in this, and then they subject it to 10-mile-an-hour winds, 30-mile-an-hour winds, and 60-mile-an-hour winds. because major fires create their own wind conditions. We talked a little bit about that. But, and because we were talking again about this yesterday, the more their research looks at this, there's a concept in the FireWise training called the home ignition zone, which is that 10-foot area right around your house. And whether it's dry mulch or plants or firewood or lawn furniture or what have you that burns, anything that in that area, based on very well understood principles of fire behavior, and not wildland fire behavior. This is fire in corners, this is fire against flat surfaces, this is fire against siding, fire on decks. If you're within that 10-foot zone and you have combustible materials, your potential for ignition goes up a lot. Besides having a protected Class A roof, the most important protection for your home is having that area 10 feet around your house clear of combustible material. And this isn't, I know it looks goofy. As somebody said, it looks goofy. But that's what the research shows. And you've received, I know because this was another question that Joe had, you've received documentation from the fire district going back, for many of you, to 1993, when the first fire hazard severity zones were mapped by the state as a part of state law. And as part of that law, it says that we as the local fire agency are required to enforce defensible space around homes in these areas where fire hazard severity is expected to be extreme. And that's created so many different problems. But the basic problem is we want people to understand the value of this and do it voluntarily. It hasn't helped that we've laid off all the people, except for 1.5 people, who used to do weed abatement inspections. We don't have the personnel to go through, even provide education on this anymore. We have pamphlets, we have information, we have resources, but enforcing this issue is probably not going to be the effective way of gaining people's interested, voluntary, and useful and knowledgeable compliance. Because we have to change the way people perceive your self-interest. And we're talking about my house is going to look goofy if I take stuff that burns within 10 feet of it. Don't ask me what goofy looks like. My wife gets so mad when I am the least aesthetically inclined person there is, which isn't to say I'm not sensitive to it. But I can't take information like this 10-foot area and all the research, and I've looked at the research, and the research is becoming more explicit. It's not varying, it's not wavering, it's becoming, this 10-foot area is most important. And we need everybody in threatened areas to understand that. Because the fire that occurred, who remembers that fire in Tahoe? Was it 2010? I'll just discuss this briefly because it's really important. You have 2 states. You have federal, state, and local authorities working on the Tahoe area, and that's on the fire side. Then you have the Tahoe Regional Planning Authority. You have fire safe councils from both Nevada and California working collaboratively as part of an overall effort to preserve the natural appearance of the Tahoe Basin, but most of all to protect Lake Tahoe. And they've created a tremendous plan, a series of prescribed burning plans. They've got acceptable vegetation conditions. Even the U.S. Forest Service was playing, and they didn't like to play at all. You have a tremendous amount of regional cooperation achieving multiple goals. And then some kids decide to have a campfire on a bad weather day. And what happens? The fire burns through the forest, continuous canopy fire. It gets to the area of fuel treatment, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It drops to the surface, and it becomes a low-intensity surface fire. Until it encounters a house that has done nothing to prepare for fire. All their neighbors have. There's one house. The fire is so intense as that house burns, the fire is transferred back to the canopy and burns 300 homes. That's a studied, documented thing. We've learned a lot from that. This is a big picture question. I know that it's very difficult to look at your home and consider the impacts of what you're used to, but consider what your objective is, and consider what your self-interest is, and consider what your community interest is.
And another question relates to that, in that drought-tolerant landscaping oftentimes uses bark chips to replace lawns. Do bark chips represent, on soil, represent a fire hazard?
Yes.
Do with new technology, do photovoltaic panels on roofs represent a fire problem for firefighters or for homes? Is that related to this danger at all?
Both directly and indirectly. The photovoltaic systems, when they're installed on a Class A roofing assembly, may compromise the roofing assembly. And what you want to talk to your installer about is, because you need a building permit for it, and you can talk to the building department plan checkers about the installation requirements for this system and the impact on your rated roof. Indirectly, the photovoltaic systems can collect debris, and they can collect leaves and blowing material, and we're not really sure on how they affect embers, burning embers being collected on a roof. If it's not a rated roof, if you have shake wood roof, then all bets are off. You don't have to worry about your photovoltaic installation. But yes, the short answer is yes.
In this area, many homes have oak trees. They're surrounded by oak trees. Some of them actually touching the homes or growing through the roofs. What can you suggest for people that have that circumstance?
My former life, I was also an arborist. I've done a lot of tree climbing, and I've worked on trees. I was living in Maine, and I had to take out a 110-foot Norway pine that grew out of the deck of an A-frame that had a glass roof. That was the trickiest job I've done. It's always mystified me why people want trees growing out of their homes. It's a maintenance problem, and that's as a tree issue, period. Oak trees, and we'll talk about this. I mean, if you really, really want to know where the danger comes from, it's the same thing, like there's a requirement in the fire code that unless you have a certain type of fire protection system in your cooking equipment, you're not allowed to produce grease-laden vapors. And then people always go, well, what about this recipe, or what about that recipe? Or it's like, if you really want to talk about it, then we'll require the system, and then you can figure it out. When it comes down to trees growing up, if we're in a prolonged period of drought, what's called the foliar moisture content of even native fire-adaptive species drops into the toilet like everything else. And you add that to a bad weather day, a red flag day, you've got standing fuel. It's very unlikely that a standing oak tree that's living will ignite. So I can argue this issue back and forth. The airspace between the branch structure in a large open space tree like that is insulating. It insulates from the radiant heat. So I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. I'm not going to say it's a good thing. I'd question it as a matter of sustainability for your home.
Are there any plans that you know of, such as, I believe, an Australian shelter-in-place scheme that can help people to survive a wildland fire if they can't get out? Is there anything that you can build or do to protect you?
I'm not tooting my horn, but I'm a co-chair on the Cal Chiefs Fire Prevention Officers Wildland Urban Interface Committee. And my counterparts in Southern California really like that idea. And I think we've got a categorical issue that if there's dangerous fire moving into an area and there's a challenge for you to get out and there's a threat to your life and your property, why would you try and make it easier to stay? And I can see, I mean, I've heard some arguments that all of them, every single one of them to me was like, okay, you live at the end of a 20-mile dead end and you're surrounded by a young eucalyptus forest and you're on top of a ridge line and you live there on a wooden house on stilts? So what we've come up with this process, and it's not ours. We're using the Colorado Springs model of community risk assessment. And we've developed a very detailed map, and I can really make people fall asleep with this, I bet. But we took an airplane and we flew over our area that we're worried about with hyperspectral imagery data collection. And we also collected LiDAR data, and we put them together. So now we know in computer language that's understandable to a fire behavior computer model, the nature and spatial arrangement of the different types of fuels down to a 3-foot sample distance. And so we programmed a computer behavior model to show fire behavior in our area. And we have now all these fancy outputs. We know the rate of spread, we know the flame length, we know the crown fire potential, and more importantly, we know roof types. We know defensible space characteristics. We know response time and water supply. We know access routes. We know what areas of our jurisdiction are really, really deeply in trouble. What do we do with all this information? We want to present it to the community and have the community tell us what to do. Say, hey, look at what you've done. Look at where you live. Do you know what this means for us? What do you want us to do about it? You want us to put a bunch of fire stations in here? That's going to be expensive. You want us to buy aircraft? You want us to do X, Y, or Z? I mean, what do you want us to do? Or do you want to voluntarily comply with building standards, defensible space, community planning, ready, set, go? It becomes very complicated. I mean, so when you go back to the shelter issue, okay, yes. To answer the technical question, every shelter that I've seen faces the same difficulty as a nuclear bomb shelter. That if you have a major fire moving over the area, the available oxygen gets sucked out of your shelter. I know they're working on it.
On a very different note, the state of California has fire trucks in different locations. These trucks are green in color. How do they work and where?
The green fire apparatus in the state of California are typically United States Forest Service.
Civil defense ones.
Sorry?
Civil defense is lime green.
Civil defense units for the military?
No, for the fire, there's one in Kensington.
Oh, no, those are CalEMA, those are state emergency units. There's Office of Emergency Services, Cal OES, and they have stationed a water tender in Moraga, and we trade it back and forth. The problem there is we got to staff it. And we've closed fire stations, so we've got some really nice equipment. You know, we need to be able to support our firefighters. We need to support the staffing and personnel, because the general plan was designed with a specific firefighting strategy in mind. And currently we're not able to fully cover the way that the original design of that fire protection system was intended. Like I said, we have adapted to our current resources. But that's what those green colored engines are. They're either, the darker green are the Forest Service and the lighter green are the Cal OES.
Here's a CERT related question. Since many CERTs have excellent radios, somewhat good to excellent radios and binoculars, and live in high spaces. So if they can sense that there's a fire brewing, is there a way that they can get the information out earlier than, as early as possible, where it'll do the most good for the first responders and for their neighbors?
Well, here, let me show you this. Does your radio look like this? Did it cost an ungodly amount of money? These radios are both digital and VHS. And we are, along with all other public safety and other agencies in the East Bay, are part of the eBRICS, the Regional Communication System. This radio system is going through growing pains like everything else, but it's intended to use digital radio communication to provide coverage for emergency servicers that can talk between disciplines. We can talk to fire, and we can talk to our neighboring fire jurisdictions, but we can also talk to the police, and we can talk to public works, and we can talk to the hospitals. And this is all interoperability stuff that we learned the hard way again in 9/11 and in repeated disasters. This radio system is intended to address that. But more significantly, and basically, when you have a very limited bandwidth, I mean, it doesn't matter how important you are or what you're seeing, if you're stepped on by somebody else who's talking on a radio frequency and they're not using the right etiquette, it's just creating a major problem. We wouldn't ask for anybody to communicate on our radio frequencies or try to communicate directly with our apparatus. I mean, for a variety of reasons. We work through the incident command system. So we have to dispatch using the proper procedures through our dispatch center. And because of all our units are now computer dispatched, that means the closest resource responds. It's not just a matter of talking to each other. Hey, Bob, did you see that? Yeah, I saw it. Well, are you close? Yeah, I'm close. It's the computers at the communication center track the real location of where everybody is. Actual communication on the radios is kept to a bare minimum. We want to spend as little time talking on the radios as possible. That being said, there's a value to a series of connected radios and radio operators who have a plan. And if that plan covers a broad enough area and those people are coordinated enough, it would be the same way that we deal with brigades for some of our major industrial occupancies, where there's an organized emergency response unit that we interface with. Or if it's a school, the same way we make schools practice evacuation drills, but when we get there, we want the principal to come up to us and say, here's what we know. And that takes practice. They practice it every month. And we want specific information. We want the children to, not equating CERTs by any means with children, but I'm saying the teachers have to conduct their classes in an orderly fashion out of the building with this horrible noise and all these blinking lights occurring, and practice that every month so that when there's an actual emergency, the kids have that behavior ingrained. And the teachers are ingrained to count the kids. And the area people are ingrained to go talk to the teachers. Do you have all your kids? And the principals get the information from their regional people, say, we've got all the kids. And the principal goes to talk to the fire captain and says, everyone's out. And if there is a way that communication can work that way, then we would support it. But, it's something to consider. It's something to consider how you'd want to communicate with your group. And what purpose? What is your intent?
I'm going to make this the last general question. If there are any more specific questions or personal questions, I'm sure that Captain Laing will be more than happy to take them one-on-one at the end of this, but we have to watch a little bit what's going on at the time. And this is not a wildfire question. This is a question about a different type of fuel, gas. I know that you didn't bring this up, whether there were gas breaks gas line breaks or leaks that added to the danger and the propagation of the fire, but maybe not in a fire, perhaps in an earthquake. We have some pretty major gas lines that travel through Walnut Creek. And if one or two of those broke, does the fire district have a ready way of combating fire from coming up from the ground in gas line breaks? Or is that a whole brand new chapter?
That is a whole brand new chapter. But it's a good question. In light of what happened in San Bruno, which was a natural gas pipeline, what people in the community should be aware of is that there are underground pipelines emanating from Contra Costa County, specifically the northern west part of Contra Costa County, that go all throughout the western United States. And they carry everything. There's jet fuel, there's kerosene, there's diesel, there's gasoline, sometimes up to 12 or 1300 psi. And sometimes it's not that deep. The Kinder Morgan pipeline rupture in southern Walnut Creek in 2004, 10 people died. The fire burned for, I think it was 17 hours in a residential neighborhood. We learned a lot from that. We continue to learn. I'll tell you this, I mean, in structure firefighting, if the gas meter breaks, you have a ready supply of fuel for a fire. If you have propane tanks that are adjacent to a fire, not only can they cause emergency venting and have that venting ignite, but they have a whole unique phenomenon known as a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. When it comes down to it, gasoline, whether it's stored in your garage or in a vehicle's car tank, diesel, household chemicals, you can really start to get carried away with all the different hazards, because there are a ton. And that's not even accounting for the changes in the types of furniture and furnishings that we have, mostly plastic, petroleum products. The threat profile to your average household has changed dramatically in the last 50 years. So yes, gas becomes involved in fire, whether it's through a meter break or through some fixture breaks. There are any number of hazards that occur in this county, and we've experienced it a lot. Yes, we have a plan. We train for it. I can tell you that much, that securing the utilities at a single-family detached residential structure fire is a first order of business, because nobody wants to get electrocuted. And there have been firefighters who've been electrocuted. So, yes, taking that into account and being careful of all that stuff is part of what we do.
And with that, we're going to call it a wrap. I want to thank Captain Laing once more for being here tonight.